Hey everybody, this is Ken from Nippon Bro. How's it going? Hope you guys are having a great day. And today we are starting the series 2, Editing Photos 101 for Beginners. And this episode 1 is just going to go through exposure, and we are going to explain what exposure is and how that works in Lightroom. So if you stay tuned, right after this, we'll get right into it. Alright, welcome back guys. So basically I am doing these series of tutorials for editing photos in any program actually, whether it's Lightroom or Luminar or any other program that you may have. These basics apply to most editing apps for photos. So whether we talk about exposure, contrast, whites and blacks, etc., we are going to learn it all. And the reason why I'm breaking it down into several episodes is because some of them actually take a little bit to explain, and I don't want these videos to go on more than 20 minutes, half an hour. I actually want to keep them a little bit more shorter than my previous episodes of tutorials, so it's a little bit easier for you to kind of digest each episode. So I'm not going to talk too much in these as far as like sidetracking or anything like that, but I will be explaining each term to you, so at least you know what each term is and you get a further understanding, rather than just saying that, oh, this is what it does here. If you slide it this way, if you slide it this way, you can do that yourself. And it's more of the understanding and definition of the terms, and then you get to realize what it actually does. And I believe if you do go to a photography school and anything like that, you will be learning this. And the fact that I'm actually doing this for free to be able to provide and give back to everyone who's out there that wants to get into photography or videography, these are the tutorials that I want to do for you, and I don't want to charge anyone for it. So if you could subscribe, like the video, and share it as much as possible to other people that you may know that want to get into photography, because this is going to be one of the things that they want to learn post-production work after they shoot their photos. But anyways, that's the introductory part for this video. We are going to get right into Lightroom, and I am going to show you what exposure is today. So let's get into it. Alright guys, so today in Lightroom and any other program that you have, you are going to have a toolbar, which is most likely going to be on the right hand side for most programs that you use. And Adobe Lightroom Classic has basically subdivided these categories, and the way you're supposed to actually use Adobe Lightroom is to actually go from top to bottom in actually editing a photo. Rarely would you see anyone actually just go right into the middle and start editing and then move on to the basics and then maybe HSL and kind of jump around like that. So for most people, when they do edit, they go through from top to bottom, and that's their routine. That's just how they do it, and that's how Lightroom wants you to use it. And if you do an edit somewhere else in the middle, it's going to affect once you do the basics again. So that is the premise of Lightroom, and that's how you want your workflow to be. Just work the way it's laid out, and everything will just work out for you. So today what we're going to do is we are going to cover this top part where the histogram is, and all the other scaling and masking tools and patch fixes. Definitely going to get into that, but this episode is not for that. We're going to get into probably the last episode, just because this is not really too important right now. It's kind of like when you want to do a little bit more tweaking to your photo in terms of selecting certain areas and focusing on that. That is when you start using these tools, but right now we're not going to focus on that. We're just going to go straight to basics. Alright, so once you open up basics, you're going to see all these sliders, and these sliders mean gibberish to a lot of people, and that's totally understandable. That's what it meant to me when I first saw it. And mind you, I never went to photography school to learn this stuff, nor took any of the academy courses for Adobe or went on Skillshare to learn anything. Basically, I learned this all by myself, and as well as researching on Google what each definition means. And that's how I can kind of relay this message to you, because I learned it from trusty sources that are on the internet and that are from very credited websites. So I'm going to be putting down links in the description below for anyone who wants to go and check out the resource of where I got the definition from. And these are all trusted websites that actually define what exposure is, what contrast is. But some of these websites actually don't put it into clear layman terms for beginners, and they still use these languages like they're speaking to a photographer that's actually knowing a little bit of the terms of what they're doing. So I kind of went ahead and translated those, still keeping the definition, but just using a little bit of a language that is more understandable for the general public. All right, so getting into this, we are seeing on the right-hand side here all these sliders. Now, all these sliders obviously do something, and you can, go ahead and play around and slide it around, but you're probably not going to know what it actually does. And so today we are actually skipping this white balance part and this temperature and tint controls. The only reason is because you want to fix your exposure, your highlights, your shadows, and blacks, in my opinion, because you want to get the exposure of the photo right before you start manipulating some of the colors. And that's just always been how my workflow is. Some people are a little different, because if we start changing the colors right away and then go down into exposure and contrast and everything like that, you're gonna actually see a change in the color because the gradient's gonna start to change. So this is why I recommend people to start off with exposure and contrast. But again, if you are, wanting to work literally from top to bottom, then that's okay. But I just feel like we should work on what they call here the tone and fix this part first in order to kind of move on to the next step. But nevertheless, however you work, the sliders are going to work exactly the same for every single person. So if you kind of draw an imaginary line down the middle here, you're going to see basically left and right of those sliders. The right side is going to be positive and the left side is going to be negative. Now, you might think that, okay, so that just means that if I put the exposure way up here, it's going to go positive, meaning brighter. All right, so that just makes sense. The only exception to this is actually the blacks and the shadows. Now, for some reason, these ones, the positive you take away the shadows. So if you see on the image right here that I have, if you go positive, it's gonna just be, the shadows kind of disappear. But then if you go negative, you start introducing more and it gets darker. So this is why for shadows and blacks, you're gonna see again, blacks here, takes away the blacks and introduce the blacks. So if you want to think of it that way, that's how I kind of think of it. But if you want to interpret it a different way, that's totally up to you. But for shadows and blacks, I just always assume that right side is taking away. So positive numbers, it basically takes away everything. It brightens it up, I guess, in a sense, if you want to think of it that way. And then if you go the left, which is a negative, it's going to be darker. It's adding the shadows, it's adding the blacks. Okay, so that's kind of counterintuitive, but I kind of understand why they did that. But if you want to take it for that, then that's totally up to you. But as long as you understand what it does, that's all that matters. But again, that actual kind of positive and negative on right side and left side, that goes for every single one of these sliders, okay? So if you go down to presence with texture, clarity, dehaze, this is all the same. Right side, you add it, left side, you decrease it. So that's pretty self-explanatory. All right, but anyways, getting back into the tone side and getting into only exposure today, I would have done contrast with this episode, but I felt like it would take way too long. So again, trying to keep it short, and because this is an introductory episode, as well as doing exposure, it is going to be a little bit longer than the next few episodes. But some of these, like if I go like highlights and whites, maybe whites and blacks episode, that is going to be in one episode because it's really simple to kind of convey the message to you. All right, so now that you kind of understand what those sliders do in terms of like what does it do when it goes right and what does it do when it goes left, it just adds, subtracts, minus, again, the blacks and shadows. But now we are going to go through the definition of exposure, okay? So the definition of exposure in editing is a little bit different than what it is on camera, but the nature of what it does is exactly the same. And what I mean by that is in camera, The definition of exposure is the amount of light that hits your sensor or film if you have a film camera. And it is actually a very crucial part that plays into whether your photo turns out very bright or very dark or perfectly neutral, meaning perfectly exposed. But again, I use that term perfectly a little bit loosely because there isn't really such thing as perfectly exposed. It's just your perception of what perfect is. So what does exposure actually mean when it comes to editing in a software? Well, basically it artificially adds brightness or darkens the image. And when I say artificially, it's because it still takes a little bit of information away if you go too dark or if you brighten it up too much. And as long as you retain that kind of sweet spot area where your camera is actually capturing all that data and you stay within that range, then you can play around with that slider as much as possible. But let's say you crank that exposure all the way to the right. Now you're gonna start losing some information because your image might be way too bright. And if you do that, then it's hard to get it back if you did save that file into a JPEG form and then you try to edit that JPEG, you most likely won't get that information back if you overexpose parts of the image. And that just goes the same for when you underexpose and you make it too dark. And so that's why when you save it into a JPEG afterwards, if you lost that information, it's hard to get it back. And this is why I did that comparison video, RAW versus JPEG. And if you haven't seen that, I'll link it somewhere up here or in the description below as well if you want to go see that comparison as well. All right, guys, so basically I want to show you guys an underexposed image and what it does if I add exposure to it, and vice versa if I darken it even more than what it is right now. So this is a rainy day and it was at nighttime. I took this photo and basically it was a bit underexposed, but there's enough information in there that is retained, hopefully, that I can bring back. And I'm just afraid of this kind of top right hand corner. It might have lost a little bit of data in there, but we're not sure until we actually play around with it. So let's see what happens when we crank this exposure slider up to the right. So we're just gonna bring that up and you can see the image getting brighter and brighter. Awesome, look at that. Perfect. So then let's say we expose it to here, which is plus 2.5. I don't really focus on the number too much. A lot of people I've seen don't, and some people are really critical with the numbers. And if you want to get that far into learning exposure and all these other numbers, then that's great. How much to put it up by. But for me, honestly, it doesn't really matter because I just kind of go solely off the look of the photo. But again, this is just an example. Now, if you tap on the keyboard for backslash, you are going to just jump to the original and you can tap it again to go back to your edit. Again, just take a look at the top right-hand corner side. Now, I think you can faintly see this kind of branch here and you can see the division between the building and the sky. And when we pump up the exposure, we brought that information back. Again, zoom in, but now we have a lot of noise. That's because you're trying to get back data that is there, but all these pixelated kind of noise is information that's lost. So yeah, you can crank it all the way up and then get that definition between the building and everything like that, but you're faced with noise. And this is just critical when it comes to underexposing a photo. All right, so let's just go all the way right for the sake of just blowing this out as much as possible. All right, so now we've blown it out and obviously now it's too white, super noisy. It's actually pretty noisy throughout the entire photo. Even when it becomes the lighter parts where it's actually lit, it's noise everywhere. So again, this is when you want to kind of crank it down and not show too much noise. So that's why you kind of want to keep it a little on the darker side. But again, this is totally up to you, whatever your taste is. So if you think that that is good, then that's good. If you like a little bit of noise in your photo, because there's a lot of people that add artificial noise to a photo if they want a certain look. So it's totally up to you. Again, photography is totally subjective in my opinion. So if you like a certain style, then go for it. No one is telling you you can't. No one's controlling you how you edit. It's just totally up to you. And that's the beauty of photography and editing and videography. Just the amount of freedom that you get and that amount of control that you get as well. All right, so let's just go down and drag this all the way down to the black side, the dark side, and you see almost nothing but lights. Let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going, and yeah, you see speckles of light. Now, it almost seems like it turns into bokeh, but yeah, I mean, that's all you see. And then you can brighten it up again, and there you go. So this is kind of an example with an underexposed image. So let's go on to somewhat of a brighter image and check out that. So I have this one here for you. This one is actually not too badly exposed. I would say it's fair exposure. You have detail in the sky, you have detail in the foreground and the midground as well. But no matter what photo you use, the exposure slider does exactly the same job as any other photo would. So let's just say on this photo right here, we just crank up the exposure. We're gonna crank it up, crank it up, crank it up, and we have lost most of the building. I mean, you see a little bit down here just because there's some trees there, but if the sky was all the way down here to the bottom of the building, you're practically going to see no information. Like, you can't even see the line. So if you save this as a JPEG, you're gonna lose all this information. You're not gonna be able to get it back as a JPEG format. But while you're still in RAW format, you can bring that information back. But again, this is a perfectly exposed image, so you are gonna be able to bring it back. So it's a little bit of a bad example, but you're gonna understand, you know, what you can do in terms of RAW images and bringing photos back. And now let's just go back to the dark side. We're gonna go dark, 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 dark. And now you get this like really like, it's a cool vibe. I mean, you see the little satellites up here with the red lights, and you see the dark kind of shadow here. It really gives it that mood. And the sky is still lit partially. But again, not something that I would use in terms of posting it on Instagram or anything, but you can. But yeah, basically this tells you how much information is actually there, and we might have actually lost this part of the image because it's really dark. So my rule of thumb to anything that's overexposed or underexposed. So overexposed in camera, there's a thing called zebras, and no, not the actual zebra that you see in the Safari. But zebra has the meaning of black and white stripes because when you go into your camera settings, you're gonna see the settings called zebra. Now this depends on what camera you have and where it is in the menu, but every camera should have it as long as it's digital and not analog. But you're gonna see the zebra show up. Now, usually for me, when I set zebras, you can set it to 95%. That just means that at 95%, these zebras are going to show. And if they show, then I know that I should start backing off of it, or at least not show any zebras. So I would adjust the aperture, or I'll adjust the shutter speed to make those zebras disappear from my photos. Then I know that I'm in the safe zone. A lot of people sometimes do like zebras of 105 or 100, and that's pushing it. I mean, if you're gonna go that high, you're expecting to back off a little bit of it, because if those zebras start to show at 100, you're at risk of losing that information. So you don't want to really play around with that border. You can if you want, but that's why I kind of go to 95 and be really safe, because if I start showing zebras at 95, that means I still have room because I'm not at 100 yet. Okay, anything over, I would say 110 is losing data, and you don't want to be in that kind of area where, yeah, I could still shoot it, and then you get back in post and you can't recover it. That's why I kind of play it safer with 95%. again, if you are doing this, go search on YouTube for your camera model or your brand, and you should be able to find the zebra settings and set it to 95% like I do if you want to stay a little safe, but you can push the envelope a little bit and go at 100 or 105 if you want to kind of have the extra little bit. Now on the other side of the spectrum is underexposure. Now underexposure, I wish they kind of had a zebra system for that. If anyone knows if there is a zebra system for underexposure, tell in the comments below to everyone and let everyone know. But otherwise, I'm not aware of it, but you can figure out by the histogram. The histograms on cameras are a little bit gimmicky. I don't find it doing that well to find and explain to people, especially beginners. Maybe if you know what you're doing, you may understand the histogram on your actual camera, but for me, I didn't understand at all. So my rule of thumb to underexpose photos is basically really simple, and it's basically just training your eye and seeing if the dark areas of your photo, whether you can still see the data within the LCD screen. Because if you cannot see the details anymore, like for example on this photo, rule of thumb for me, if I can still see the building, the actual detail around this building is still there. Now, when I said I was worried about the bottom here, where it was too dark, I believe this, if I saved it as a JPEG, I won't be able to get it back. I won't be able to retain this data anymore. So again, if I look through the camera and I see that here it's too dark, I can't see anything, there's no detail left to my eyes, then I'm pretty sure the software won't actually bring it back. There might be a little bit, but you're not going to be able to bring it back to, let's say, if you go all the way over here, you're not going to see all these tilings anymore. All right. So this is where I say the rule of thumb is if you can't see it, the camera can't see it. Okay. So just kind of go with that and you will be safe. You should never expose that far underexposed unless you're purposely doing it. And yes, there are photos out there that actually purposely overexpose and underexpose to get a certain mood out of a photo, depending on how the artist wants to portray the photo. All right guys, so that concludes the first video tutorial for editing photos 101 for beginners and learning exposure. So hope you guys liked this first episode, and the next one will be coming soon for contrast, and that is a whole nother thing to go over. And then we'll get into the other sliders. So this is going to be a couple of episodes, so hopefully you guys stick around and share it. I'm going to be making a playlist, in fact, for this particular series, so you can actually share the playlist to your friends, to your colleagues, to anyone in photography groups that you belong to. Just share it, and hopefully people get value out of it. All I ask is for a subscribe and smash the like button, turn on those notifications so you actually know when the next tutorial comes out, so that would be pretty important. And if you have any other questions, feel free to DM me on my Instagram, which I'll have it in the link in the description below as well. And you can just comment down below and I'll try to answer as many of those as possible. And if you guys have any other suggestions on videos for the future besides the tutorial videos that I'm making, please let me know in the comments down below as well. So until next one, I will see you guys later, and just stay safe out there and stay healthy. All right, peace.